How's it going, everybody? My name is Timothy Dermody, and today I will be talking to you about the different standards that Canada demands for its potential immigrants and the bias associated with these certain standards and the different trends that have taken place in immigration in Canada over the past decade. So, as most of you are already well aware, Immigration Canada follows a point system where hopeful immigrants and immigrant candidates are required to score a minimum of 67 points to even be declared a potential immigrant. This point system adjusts your score according to several factors, including education, English and French language capability, including reading, writing, speaking, and even listening, work experience, age, arranged employment, which I will be bringing up again later, adaptability, and finally a proof of funds, where your net worth is calculated based on your available transferable currency. The 67-point system is actually a recent development in Canada's immigration system since its invocation in 2003. It used to require a minimum of at least 75 points to be considered eligible. The system is clearly effective considering that Canada has the highest net immigration rate in the world per capita, bringing in almost 260,000 people per year. However, there is a very, very strong bias associated with this astounding number. Immigrants typically apply under three different classes: family class, independent class, and refugee. The most dominant accepted class by far is the independent class immigrant. These immigrants apply for the sole purpose of finding work in Canada and do so as an individual. The chart you are looking at examines the second to third immigration quarter in 2010, showing the separate groups of immigrants in a 6-month period. Clearly, the independent class immigrant, also known as the economic class immigrant, has a substantially larger presence in this example, which doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, think about it. Canada uses its immigration system to provide jobs globally, but also to fill the empty positions that domestic-born Canadians simply don't have the manpower to fill. Sadly, these jobs are usually those that don't pay very well and have little to no benefits. As I mentioned earlier, one of the pertaining categories for immigration eligibility declared under the point system is arranged employment. A potential immigrant scores higher if they have a job waiting for them on Canadian soil. These jobs, requisitioned to a working age demographic, create a definitive bias in Canada's immigration strategies. As you can see in this graph, age plays a key factor in immigration eligibility. Even though it does not seem to be the most important category mentioned in the point system, this graph clearly shows that most of those who succeed in completing this process are encompassed within the ages of 25 to 40. This is no mistake. Canada wants and needs immigrant workers to support growth and economic stability. Those who are too young or too old are deemed dependents and provide no benefit to Canadian society. Just as a side note, I'd like to remind you that this is not my opinion, but rather a very harsh truth. Canada does not want to take on more elderly and young, putting strain on healthcare and welfare. Rather, they provide an open gate to those who benefit the economic prosperity of Canada.
In Canada, many skilled immigrants, particularly those with Indian, Caribbean, Chinese, or Arab background, wind up in occupations far below their educational levels, despite having been selected for high levels of training and experience in professions such as healthcare, engineering, and education. This phenomenon is referred to as the taxi driver syndrome, or brain waste. In the 1996 census data, it was estimated that immigrant skill underutilization costed the Canadian economy $3.1 billion. This cost was measured by assessing earning losses to immigrants because of working in occupations below the skill levels where comparably qualified native-born Canadians are working. Canada significantly increased the emphasis on education in the selection of immigrants. As a result, the proportions of immigrants with bachelor degrees nearly doubled from about 25% in the early 1990s to about 45% in the most recent period. This shows the educational level of Canada's immigrants has risen much more rapidly than for the native born. Yet, the proportions of immigrants in the more highly paid occupations that use those skills, such as in science, engineering, or nursing, is only marginally higher, and their relative earnings have remained unchanged. Immigrants with university degrees might be expected to have benefited most from the new programs. But between 1996 and 2006, the proportion working in professional or semi-professional fields actually declined from 53% to 51%. These declines could be due to the several barriers in employment success for immigrant professionals in Canada, such as employers' lack of familiarity with foreign qualifications, as well as professional licensing procedures set up with Canadian qualifications in mind, immigrants' lack of professional connections, their unfamiliarity with professional and business lingo in Canada, and of course, their lack of Canadian experience. All these have effects intertwined with the impact of racial and cultural differences. Although the government has been trying to enact a change in this issue through community groups. One of the leaders in promoting immigrant skill utilization is the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, or TRIAC. Their annual reports show the range of initiatives and provide some numerical assessment of impact. For example, in 2009, it reported that its mentoring partnership program matched 5,000 skilled immigrants with Canadian professional mentors. Career Bridge internships, which TRIAC helped initiate, provided 1,300 skilled immigrants with Canadian experience, and 600 skilled immigrants made connections through multiple networking events. Although the government has enacted efforts to address immigrant brain waste, the efforts are still too small and inadequate in magnitude to make more than a small dent in the overall problem. In fact, the issue has been worsening when considering more immigrants are coming in than they did in the 90s, and the educational skill level of immigrants has risen significantly.
The Canadian immigration practice is often criticized by two main factors, being large amounts of discretion in the minister and a lack of judicial investigation. From time before until the 1960s, Canada chose its immigrants on the basis of their racial categorization and not on the assessment of the individual merits of applicants. Aside from the exclusion of the Chinese, which was a legislative action, the exclusion of other racial groups was accomplished through a combination of regulatory orders in council, policy directives, and the rigid enforcement of seemingly neutral immigration, health, and money requirements against specific racial groups. Since the 1960s, when a point system was introduced for the selection of immigrants, race officially became a relevant factor. Now more than 82% of our immigrants come from third world countries. Thus, when the government now moves to restrict family sponsorship or imposes a new head tax, which are on their face colorblind, the effect of these measures falls upon the 82% of immigrants. I would like to introduce you to a great example of racial discrimination in immigration in Canada. This example was known to be the Underground Railway that escaped the blacks. Many Canadians have heard of the Underground Railway that brought and escaped the black American slaves to Canada. A few were aware of the previous railway which went south before slavery was abolished in what is today Canada. Later, when farmers from the United States were being encouraged to settle in Western Canada, black farmers were actively discouraged. Immigration agents in the U.S. were instructed to stop providing information to blacks, to penalize railways who distributed the transportation subsidies for transporting blacks, to actively discourage blacks from immigrating by telling them that it was too cold and Canada was too hostile. Finally, blacks like Chinese who entered under the head tax and Jews from Europe were subject to additional medical investigation not applied to whites. Finally, an order in council was passed in 1911 which directly prohibited blacks from Canada. However, by this time, the other measures had already stopped black immigration to Canada.